Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Operating at the Edge, exploring the impact of automation on federal technology practices. I'm George Jackson, executive producer of GovExec TV. I'll be your host for today's program. A little context here. As federal leaders contend with everything from growing citizen expectations to cybersecurity challenges, many are turning to advancements in automation to transform their workflows, streamline their processes. With the risk of cyber attacks right around the corner, these tools can provide agencies with uniform security posture across all of their platforms, lowering the risk of attack and optimizing the ways it can be addressed. By employing these tools of the future, government organizations can be prepared to develop today's solutions and anticipate tomorrow's challenges. Joining me today to discuss those tools of the future, Nicholas Lanham, the Deputy Program Director for the Advana Program within the Department of Defense's Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office. Nick, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, George. Really appreciate the opportunity to present today.
Absolutely. And Sebastian Dunne, a Principal Solution Architect at Red Hat. Sebastian, good to see you too, sir.
Good to see you too, George, and thank you for having me here today.
Of course. So no need for kind of full bios or CVs here, but Nick, I'd love to start with you to learn a little bit more about what the DoD Chief Digital and AI Office is, what you do, what fits in that portfolio, because as I understand it, it's relatively new.
Thanks, George. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the background and the particular use cases that we support. I think it's important to kind of understand the history of where we've come from and how the organization has really come to be at the time now. I can kind of speak from my experience here. I joined DoD as an ops research analyst, really kind of focusing on data science and modeling in the weapon system space. Had worked previously in the Department of Navy, and then worked in OSD Cape. And I met, at that time, Greg Little, who was leading up something called the Universe of Transactions over in OSD Comptroller. And in my opinion, that was one of the most revolutionary things that had been happening in the department, as it really represented one of the first times in DoD history where we had 30 plus general ledger, those financial accounting systems, those ones that have really, you've seen them in the news. We haven't had them integrated in a way in the past. He was able to actually get them integrated for the first time and support our DCFO through the OSD Comptroller to basically support DoD's audit, which is one of the largest audits of mankind. So seeing that kind of progress really got me kind of amped to join the team here, and I've been on Greg's team for about 3.5, 4 years now. And we have since then really used that audit methodology to expand in pretty much every other analytical zone in DoD. So if you think personnel, you think readiness, you think incident response, anything that our senior leadership is really asking us to dig into, those are the data acquisition and automation efforts and analytical efforts that we're really focused on here within the Advana platform, as well as what we do to support bigger, broader CDAO. Maybe one more minute on that before sending it back over to you, George, is since our time in Comptroller, our organization has now migrated and reworked into CDAO. So it's a really exciting time because today is actually our FOC day as well for getting up and running. As you guys have seen in the news, our new CDAO is soon to start here. So we're very excited to get rolling. And basically that same methodology that we used in the audit, we're continuing to expand here. So have you seen DSD's memo on the 5th of May called Creating Data Advantage? There's some real clear guidance in there of using authoritative data sources to help our senior leaders make data-driven decisions during senior governance meetings, and then making sure that that data is in an environment where other analysts, AOs, and teammates across the department can really leverage it to build out, analytics, which we really hope to support AI, ML at an enterprise level for the rest of the Department of Defense. So there's a lot in that. We're very much in the beginning of our journey as CDAO and really excited to support. We're bringing a lot of tech and team oriented focus on data acquisition and automation here. So anyway, that's a little bit about the history of where we're at now, where we are now and where we've come from. And I'll turn it back over to you, George. Over.
Thank you, sir. Tons to unpack there. The phrase that immediately comes to mind, Nick, is no good deed goes unpunished. Now that you've had such success in the financial arena, it's just expanding all over the place. Sebastian, do sort of a similar kind of high-level view of the work that you do at Red Hat. What goes into it?
Sure. So in my role as a principal solution architect at Red Hat, I work with many federal government customers. Most recently, been working with the FAA, NOAA, NASA, the Department of Energy labs, but it's certainly not limited to them. But basically, for the past couple of years now, I've been specializing in our Ansible automation platform and helping these government customers move along that automation journey. Started out as a very tactical enterprise, I would say, for many years. The tool set has changed dramatically, I would say, in about the last 10 years. The market used to be filled with very proprietary tools. The networking team would use a different tool from the server team, which used different tools from the security team. And now that we have tools developed from the open source community, now that we have tools that can be shared across those different groups, we have organizations and our federal agency customers really thinking about automation in a much more strategic way. So they're doing exactly the kinds of things that Nick is talking about doing in his enterprise.
Great context. I love that, helping customers move along that automation journey. I'd love to start there if I could, Nick. Those several years back when you started trying to wrap your arms with Greg Little around this issue, what were some of the first few steps or explorations that you put in place? And I ask because a lot of the folks who are tuning into this program are probably right there in their journeys. They may not be necessarily as far along as where you are inside a DoD's artificial intelligence office there. Take us back to the beginning. What did you kind of look at? What did you have to put in place?
Thanks, George. And I think maybe just spend 3 minutes on this. So, if you think back to when we first started, I'd say it's really wow. I know from just kind of speaking from my own experience as an analyst who's really, with focus on building analytical products to support senior leaders in our actual budgeting process. And I can think back to how a lack of automation in our data acquisition efforts really caused us to be very manual in DoD. And I think this is really no secret that what I'm kind of sharing with folks is that we have a lot of processes, a very big organization here that actually still kind of relies heavily on a lot of manual processes to get some of the most critical information to our senior leaders. So we really believe here in CDAO, automation is one of the keys to everything. Especially on the Advana platform, I know that's something very big that Greg and I have focused on over the last several years here is automating everything from data acquisition to giving folks who want to leverage our platform the ability to come in and kind of build their own self-service automated analytical products that feed applications. And what we hope to really expand here with our reorganization into CDAO with our partners from Jake and DDS and all of the other organizations that are coming together to really leverage that data foundation in a government-owned environment to be able to support enterprise AI and ML work that's coming on down the road. And again, that's being prioritized by our senior leadership. But kind of thinking back of the challenges that we encountered, we're still, I'd say, working through the identification of what authoritative data sources are, and then how to create automated data connections to each one of those sources at the scale of what we're working on now. And if, just for context, if you think about it, DoD, we're kind of unique in the fact that we have thousands of DoD systems that span different classification levels. And I think one of the vignettes Greg likes to always talk about is we officially have one of the oldest systems on record, as well as some of the most cutting edge, latest, and greatest tech that's out there that's really easy to connect to from a cloud environment. We have to basically be able to connect to all of those and automate those data pipelines to bring it into this enterprise data management analytics space, to where we can really tee up our, action officers, our ops research analysts, our data scientists, the future of the data enterprise in DoD with really solid gold tables that they can leverage to build out their analytical products. Hopefully that helps.
Sebastian, a couple of themes that I'm hearing there. lack of automation in the acquisition process led to a very manual enterprise in DoD. My guess is, and you have much more scope across the public sector landscape, that that's common to federal agencies. Am I reading that right?
Surely, and I don't even think it's a problem limited to federal government customers. We see the same issues even in the commercial space. So everybody is really reevaluating those they're seeing value out of finding those manual processes and then automating those. But you're right, in the government space, I think if there is a difference between how the government has approached this problem and how the commercial space works, is that I think in the commercial space, they've been a little quicker to just get started. But everybody follows really the same path once they do get started, and they can start small. They look for those small sort of tactical use cases. They look for something that'll be successful and have very quick returns if they do some automation. As you can imagine, those are not that difficult to find. Within the IT space, if you dig in to any of those different groups that we talked about before, they're doing a lot of things manually today. And these are highly skilled, relatively expensive resources that we are, allowing them to spend a lot of time. Some estimates are 80 or 90% of their time just keeping the lights on with that kind of manual work. So there's a very quick return on investment we find from finding those even smaller use cases and automating those, with the tools that are available today.
Do you feel like, Nick, with the success of what your office has been able to do relative to financial accounting, that lack of automation in the acquisition process is starting to be turned on its head a little bit? That, the leaders up at the top of DoD have realized the business value that you're producing here needs to start way back at the beginning.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I was just saying, I think Sebastian is exactly right. It's really all about getting that minimum viable product, those first sets of use cases off the ground, and getting a group of senior leaders to really champion what you're doing, or other folks that actually are making decisions, in the field, right? And I think some of the biggest things that are really helping us too is that, senior leadership is really putting out the guidance here. If you look at those memorandums that we reference from our deputy, it's very clear, connect to the authoritative data sources, or if you look in the FMR, make sure we're getting data from the lowest level transactional system possible, so that we can help support the department's first ever audit and integrate those data sets together in a way we haven't done before. Because again, most of these data sources were not developed in a way that they were designed to talk to each other. So a lot of the automation steps that we are developing as a team here across the CDAO and all of our different stakeholder organizations, because there's a lot of folks in the PSAs and in the actual service departments and combatant commands that are actually leveraging the platform to build out their own mapping logic or automate jobs that they previously had that were manual, but they needed access to some of these bigger data pipelines. Being able to kind of find that space where you have a good partner to start a use case, and then you can build that momentum and they can champion that as you go. I think that's one of the most key items here. But thankfully, we have such clear guidance from our senior leadership. It's really those memos and those documents are really what we show up with when we start any new data acquisition or data automation discussion. We're pretty much starting with one of those particular documents that I just mentioned earlier.
Sebastian, I was watching you during Nick's response out of the corner of my eye here in the video window. Looked like you had something you wanted to follow on there. Jump right in, sir.
I did. Nick made me remember a story about the beginning days of the AWS cloud, and how leadership there at one point said, everything has to have an API. If you don't launch a service with an API, you're fired. And so that was an API first, mindset. And then of course we have a cloud first mindset these days, right? Think first about, can this be easily deployed in the cloud? And it doesn't have to be cloud only. but at least think of how to leverage cloud resources first. And now I think we're entering a period where we can say automation first as well. I mean, especially if you have a new project, if you aren't thinking about automating that as you deploy it, as you start building it, you're not following, a best practice that we're evolving right now.
Sebastian, if I could stay with you for a moment here, another theme that Nick raised that I'd really like to dig into a bit is the creating of these automated data connections. And Nick, if I'm not misinterpreting your words too much here, it seems like a lot of times you have to connect the old to the new, the emerging technology solutions to the legacy technology solutions. Is that a common challenge, Sebastian, that you need to address in the broad swath of agencies that you work with across government, and how do you address it?
That's a great question, and it's one of the larger challenges, I would say, that any of the government agencies that we work with faces. Nick said he has the distinction of maybe having some of the oldest systems around. They do get quite old when we talk to our government customers, and those we try and use words sometimes other than legacy systems because that's a bad connotation. And but in all of the new technologies that we talk to our customers about, we always have to take that into consideration. So whatever we're talking about, we have to keep in mind that those legacy systems, those legacy data sources are not necessarily going to go away or can even be changed dramatically. So what we have to do, I think, is look at the more flexible technologies that are available, the ones that allow us to communicate with the old as well as the very new. And I think the only way we're going to see those technologies is through the commitment of the open source community, right? Because left to the designs of industry, I would say, nobody's necessarily going to make any money by writing integrations for things that are 30 years old. But the open source community, because we're all sort of responsible for supporting these disparate systems, there will be a little encouragement to come up with ways that will tie all these things together, no matter what their age or relevance within the systems that we deal with.
If you're just joining our webcast today, I am speaking with Sebastian Dunne, Principal Solution Architect at Red Hat, and Nick Lanham, the Deputy Program Director for the Advana Program within DoD's Chief Digital and AI Office, CDAO. Nick, I'd like to pivot our conversation just a little bit here to kind of focus on culture. I would imagine when you were laying the groundwork for a lot of this data connection based work, bridging this gap between all of these manual processes and the future of automation, you had to do a lot of cultural blocking and tackling as well. What did that look like inside? What did it involve? Was it really training based? Give us a sense of that landscape.
Yeah, sure thing, George. So we definitely have had to, work through a lot of different cultural data blockers that have kind of just, existed in DoD for a while. But I think, again, having all of our data-focused organizations and our chief data officers and in each, service here, helping us align on the priorities for our leadership, especially aligned to some of those memos that I mentioned earlier. That's really helping out a lot with a lot of those conversations in a way that, previously it was like we'd show up and we'd be, hey, we're OC, we're here to help. And everybody's like, sure, okay, great. But now that we come forward and say, hey, we have a process, we have a system that we've implemented, we have methods where we can actually create these automated connections. So as Sebastian had mentioned, I think he was referencing actually the Bezos manifesto, which really focused on getting those APIs set up so you could share data. We also are in that space where some of our systems actually don't have an API time now, but we still need data from them, and we need the ability to create an automated feed. So on our platform, it's, in our team, it's really about working with that authoritative data source and working with that stakeholder community to figure out, is there an actual technical blocker there? Is there something that we can identify to help create an automated connection that's best for that particular authoritative data source, and make sure we adhere to our senior leadership guidance, or if there's any other conversation we have to have about automation, we can have that. But I think some of the best things that help really get through some of the cultural kind of blockers, if you will, is really just showing what you can do with the information once you've automated it, and then how much it helps senior leaders and other stakeholders across the department who also need access to that information. They just haven't had the ability to in the past to get access to it at a scale of what we're trying to help deliver here. So I think, again, building off of what Sebastian mentioned earlier, it's all about getting those use cases set up, getting those minimum viable products, helping show folks what you can do with integrated data sets, especially aligned to our senior leadership's analytical priorities.
As organizations wrap around that cultural aspect, Sebastian, what should they be hyper-focused on? Is this a customer experience push? Is this an efficiency push? Is this kind of an innovation, insight-based push? Or is it more of yes, yes, and yes?
I guess I tend toward the efficiency angle. We're familiar, like one of the largest sort of cultural challenges that we run into, when we're trying to help our agency customers are the silos, between the different groups that really need to work together to be strategic around automation. Now, some of those silos are there for a good reason. For example, they're good security reasons to keep your security team separate from your networking team, who can't make changes necessarily to the application code, right? So there are good reasons to keep those groups separate, but there are also obvious inefficiencies if those groups can't work together. So not only are we seeing automation sort of help the individual teams, automation can then actually become the common language to help those teams work together. Now, that doesn't mean breaking down those silo walls, because again, they're difficult to break down. But what if they can still work together effectively, from within those silos? So one example would be, we work with a lot of security operations centers whose job is to monitor the network and the systems, all day and all night, 24/7 by 365. And they do have things that they need to respond to, maybe at 3 a.m. on a Sunday. Maybe they see an attack from a foreign country and they want to block that IP range on a network firewall, for example. Well, traditionally, the networking team was loath to give the security team access to make that kind of change on their side of the house, right? But what if it's the networking team themselves that wrote the automation that they can simply hand to the security team to execute at 3 a.m. on a Sunday, right? So we have this interesting combination of, you're not giving somebody else the keys to your kingdom, you're giving them the automated, correct way to make a change on their systems, and you're allowing them to use that in their job as the security operations center. So again, we're seeing those automation languages be a way of tying those silos together, if not eliminating them.
Nick, where does cybersecurity come into your suite of responsibilities in the Advana program? How does it touch what you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a critical component of everything we do. And we have entire organizations dedicated to focused on cybersecurity assessments, working with us day to day on all of our platform operations, as Sebastian had mentioned. And I know we're really focusing on some of the automated data connection efforts, but again, automating every step, like Sebastian mentioned, is key too. So not going too detailed here, but every one of our own platform kind of automation steps, whether it be cybersecurity focused, spinning up a new account with the right provisions and right level of access in an automated way. Those are huge items, in addition to all the automated data acquisition efforts we're doing. And those are just a few. But again, cybersecurity, it's a foundational component of everything we do. I can say that I'm really excited that we're, as part of our new CDAO organization, we've got a lot of partners coming in that are really smart in this space to help us even get better in that area. And then every one of those data sources that we actually create a connection with, George, we, as part of that conversation, we have basically a memorandum of agreement that we build with each, what we call ADS, and referenced that acronym a few times. But that system and the stakeholders who own that and their cybersecurity teams and their interface control teams are actually giving us some of the cybersecurity requirements that we need to implement in our platform, so that not only our own team, but anybody else who's requesting access to information can do that in a secure way, and then we can monitor that, as Sebastian had mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of components to it, but it's just such a critical component to every single thing we do, end to end here. Over.
Last May, Sebastian, the Biden administration put out the cybersecurity EO executive order. Zero trust was a big component of that. How do you see that shaping the automation landscape? How does the cyber EO and zero trust in particular changing, maybe the impetus to advance or improve automation government-wide?
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to mention zero trust if you didn't, George, because it's so, and don't think about zero trust. We always want to make sure our customers don't think about zero trust as a product, right? It's not. I mean, there are vendors that are trying to sort of sell things based on zero trust, but at the end of the day, it's really just a mindset. It's a change. We used to think that the firewall was the only protection we needed. And then within our networks, everything could talk to anything else. And what we've found is that is just not adequate. It was really never adequate, but it's just been shown to be very dangerous at this point. So zero trust is simply the idea that even within your own networks, everything has to validate itself before it talks to something else. You don't assume a system is what it says it is, or that a person has access unless they prove who they are and that they have access to those systems. And the only way that you are going to ensure that everything in your organization is set up to trade trust relationships like this is with automation. There's no other way to do it. It's as Nick was saying, it's too easy when provisioning accounts and things like that for a fallible human being, as conscientious as they might be, to introduce, naturally human problems and mistakes into what they do. So it's only through automation that are we going to actually change all of our systems to communicate this way. But then it's automation that will ensure they stay in that safe, secure configuration as well.
Nick, earlier you mentioned partnerships. I assume that to be a multi-layered thing for DoD. You have partnerships with components, you have partnerships with other agencies across government, you have partnerships with the private sector. How do those partnerships best work as you're trying to weave together these disparate data sources? And I guess by that, I'm asking, where do you look for guidance on how to do that most effectively? What's the gold standard that you're trying to reach for, and who helps you get there?
Well, thanks, George. That's a big question. Partnerships are everything. Again, for what we do. I mean, it's just, as Sebastian mentioned, this whole ecosystem is really too large for us to think that we're not going to be able to scale at the pace that we want to scale to, and that we need to for our leadership without those critical partnerships, and really establishing actual ones that mean something, right? And as you iterate and you get through some of those more challenging analytical questions, or hey, we've never mapped data this way before, we need your help, and we need to really kind of dig into the tables. Those kind of grittier conversations where partnerships really help you get past those 2 or 3 technical or decision level kind of things that you need to really scale to the next level, really. So I'd say within the actual DoD community, a lot of our partnerships really focus around data partnerships, as you know. So our chief data officers do an incredible job of making sure that we're working with each one of the service representatives or use case owners across DoD to make sure that we're identifying in a systematic way the authoritative data sources to meet their analytical need, that we're going through a process to acquire that information, and we're working with their own service and their folks, their ADS teammates, to actually create those automated connections to bring them into the platform. But then, from what are we actually bringing that data in? What analytics are we trying to generate? Whether it be, sometimes we just need to be able to see and inventory things versus actually building out a predictive model, or maybe leadership just needs an application to use during a live demo versus a PowerPoint. There's a lot of different levels to the analytical journey. And having partnerships, throughout every, chain of our command is also critical, because it's part of our job, I really believe, to make sure that we're helping our senior leaders know that, we're here to help. If you really do have an analytic that you're trying to use to make a data-driven decision, and you need access to information and data at a large scale, as well as the tools to be able to do something with that information, we're here to help. So I think, we definitely have a lot of work to do in this space. I want to make sure, we are very excited, obviously, about where we are in time now and where we think we're going to go as a team. But we have a lot of work to do across the DoD, because it's a big organization. So we have a lot of partnerships yet to make. Our vendor partnerships with our teammates in industry, again, super critical. Again, tech is changing so fast every day. And again, one of the main things that we focus on our platform is making sure we have a really, kind of COTS integrated open source kind of mentality, as Sebastian mentioned earlier. And as you know, as new tools and capabilities come in and out of the fold, it's assessing which ones work for your partners, which ones don't work for your partners. How do we best integrate those? How do we communicate that back to our industry teammates that really need to know what our roadmap is? I think, our leadership team and some of we have a strategy and operations group led by Ashley Evans. They do a fantastic job of putting out what our roadmap is every year. So at least what we're focused on and what our platform level priorities are as a team. And that's a really culmination of what all of our partners across DoD have kind of asked us to either implement or deploy or consider implementing. So it's just, again, can't say enough about partnerships. It means so much in every facet of what we do, but there's just some critical components to what we do that make it really the most important. I would say one of the most important things that, we really do on a tech platform is create these actual relationships with people and their organizations to talk about what we can do with data and what we hope to do with it later on down the road. Over.
Sebastian, how does industry plug in there most effectively?
Well, I think, as Nick said, one thing that we can do is sort of share the technologies, the roadmaps, sort of where things are headed based on our experience with not only our close relationship with open source communities, but also with our relationship with all the other government agencies that we work with and all the commercial enterprises we work with. So sometimes, I wasn't always working at Red Hat. I was a customer of Red Hat and other technology vendors for many, many years. And it's possible to get somewhat isolated and fixated on how your organization works and how your industry works versus what's possible outside of that. So having that sort of outside influence in terms of ideas is perhaps the most important thing that partners can provide.
Nick, let's change topics again slightly. DevSecops was something that came up before we went on the air. Some people refer to that as SecDevOps. Let me just note that real quick. But where does that come into this conversation?
Well, I think it's a really good point in this conversation to actually talk about that. So I think for us, and again, I'm just going to kind of talk to the experience that we have on our platform and kind of where we're headed time now. I think even that question is highlighting why an organization like CDAO is so critical and why it's being established really is to, what do you do with the enterprise data once it comes in? How do you set up an environment that has a foundation on automation, but focused on the analytical priorities of DoD so that you can really leverage, DevSecops, automated AI ML deployment, right, to actually serve up models and predictive capabilities to our senior most leaders who need information, right? And then to be able to change kind of, at a moment's notice really, and be able to go in a different direction if, information tells us, say, hey, leadership wants to start working on use case, XYZ and versus ABC. Having the ability to have a flexible pipeline and DevSecOps process is, very, very critical for us to be able to keep up with the pace to do this at scale and to do it securely. And again, getting back to those partners, we are right now operating in our cloud environments. Our cloud partners are such a key component to this because they have a lot of capabilities that they bring to bear, in addition to a lot of additional COTS products that we integrate, to enrich that entire pipeline as we go. But it's very critical. Matter of fact, one of the things that we're really focused on doing and the Advana platform is making sure that we have a concept kind of created for gold tables, where basically our data engineers, our ops research analysts, our data scientists are working to actually create those automated, tangible data products that could be used to deploy AI ML capabilities and really go through some of those more DevSecOps processes where we actually need to leverage all the new Python packages and libraries and other things that come into play in our tech stack to be able to deploy an analytic that meets the need at that point in time. But it's just so critical. And again, having a framework there and a process to be able to support all of this is the most key thing, in my opinion. Over.
When bringing in that DevSecOps mindset, Sebastian, how do you ensure that, and I'm going to steal one of Nick's phrases here, that flexible pipeline?
So the pipeline, again, a flexible pipeline is one of those implementation parts of the whole idea of DevOps and DevSecOps. And the way I see the tie to security is that it's all an effort, not only to build better software with the DevOps portion of that, but to be able to do what we call shifting security left, right? Traditionally, it was all too easy for our developers to, develop code, get to the point where they're almost ready to roll it into production, and only then is a security scan done. And what happens then? Well, sometimes it means they go back to the drawing board and have to fix, months or years worth of code that they've already developed, which is obviously expensive, time-consuming, and difficult. Or unfortunately, what we see in other cases is that somebody says, put it into production anyway, and we'll fix it later, even with the security flaws. So that's equally, if not more, problematic. So the idea, again, is we want to be able to shift security left in this whole process, and automation allows us to do that. And this is how it works. Basically, those developers, can, as soon as they write some new code, and this could be hourly or daily, that code can be deployed in a way that it can be automatically security scanned, and they're told immediately about flaws and what they're building from the beginning. And it means that time to repair that stuff is much faster. And at the end of this process, their code might have been scanned hundreds of thousands of times with all sorts of different security tools. And in an automated fashion, it meant that was not difficult to do. And it means that at the end of the day, you've got much more secure code, better code overall, and things that can be rolled into production much more quickly.
Is there a bottom line aspect to this conversation around automation, Nick? And by that, I mean budget, basically. I mean, has there been any evidence or any push or any exploration of how automation can save money within the work that you're doing on the Advana program?
George, yes. I mean, again, that is a very big question. I mean, we certainly have use cases, several of which we've supported for leadership, where they, have basically come forward and said, hey, we have a manual process, for one visualization or one slide, if you will, it takes us about 300 staff hours to create. Can you help us automate that so that every day our executives come into a, kind of a boardroom-like setting, and they're actually able to see an automated product for that same information, the same view, if you will, but it's based off of, the latest information that was provided by that community. If you multiply that by, every other analytic that leadership, is looking to support, or, really any level of our department, it's kind of a hard ROI to conceptualize without automation, right? And without this big focus on automating, everything from the data acquisition component. And then, Sebastian was really talking about the security component of DevSecOps, and where my brain most of the time goes to is more on the tool side of it, just to make sure that our Department of Defense teammates actually have the ability to leverage some of these industry leading capabilities to build out analytical products. And speaking from my own experience, I came from environments where, as hard as we tried to get access to, even just, cutting edge Python and SQL and R and servers that we could really run some pretty, computationally intensive things on, it's just a very big challenge. And so having a platform where we have access to these products that are approved, and they've got the right cybersecurity scans done and approvals already time now, is really helping folks who have those skill sets come in and say, hey, I really actually had a manual product that I used to generate in this really, unique kind of custom way that did get something to my leadership that was valuable, but it just took a ton of time to do that. Now we're having conversations about, well, here's our tech stack, here's our roadmap. How about we work together to figure out, is there an opportunity for us to leverage the data that we have in-house? And if not, can we partner with somebody to go acquire that information for you, automate that data pipeline? And then that information shows up in the platform so that you can leverage all these approved tools to actually build out your own capability. And then the conversation we have is, do we help you do that from a platform perspective, or do we help actually, teach the community if they're interested in learning? I think one of the really cool things Greg does here is when he purchases licenses for our products that we have on the platform is, one component of it is training, really, and making sure that folks have access to the latest and greatest training, and you can get certified in a lot of our products, officially. So if you really want to come in and you have that skill set and you want to leverage it, again, there's a great opportunity for you to come in and kind of prove your own ROI, if you will, just how important, automation is to your enterprise. Because I'd say one of the biggest demand signals, that I see anyway, is that, folks come to the platform looking to automate a process that is currently manual. And why I haven't, done a for real calculation to tell you how much time we would save or we will save. I think the fact that those folks are coming forward and requesting the ability to be able to, build that automation themselves or have conversations about moving their product into a different environment is, it's pretty clear that they believe that there's a pretty big ROI there. And I would really support to say that there's a lot more automation efforts across DoD where we can become even more efficient. I know our focus on the data acquisition side is huge, because if you think if 5 organizations need access to the same data source and they can get to it within our platform, you're really kind of eliminating the need for 4 separate connection efforts that each one of the sources has to connect to. So I know the numbers aren't exactly always 1 for 1 like that, but in a lot of cases we can help big organizations pretty quickly with a really solid enterprise, focused data acquisition effort that is focused on whatever the analytics, that the community wants to support. Anyway, I can go on about this because it's really passionate about this particular topic. But again, it's just so important to the whole entire ecosystem. Here, over.
Love it. Passionate about saving money. Nick, that's, I think, exactly what this audience wants to hear. Sebastian, even to a tech layman like me, personnel hours seems pretty easily understandable. You automate things, fewer personnel hours are involved. There's a savings associated with that. I think part of what Nick outlines there is that effective automation also eliminates the need for kind of technological workarounds to problems, because everything's sort of singing from a single sheet of music. Am I reading that right? Are there other unanticipated savings to automation that I'm missing here?
To answer that, I think I would like to sort of shift to, I noticed that Nick used terms more like efficiency than monetary savings. So I don't think automation necessarily leads, to a reduction in our budgets for these things. What it does is it starts to shift the work from rote activities that can be automated to using those, again, relatively expensive IT and cybersecurity resources on things that are mission related, right? Which is where we all want to get to. We talked about, again, organizations may be spending 80 or 90% of their time just keeping the lights on. Well, what if we could reduce that by 10, 15, or 20%? Think about how much time could be spent on actually advancing the requirements or the mission of the agency itself. There's another sort of follow-on efficiency that I think is interesting and something that we're seeing. And I'm glad to hear Nick so passionate about the sort of the ROI analytics, because that is something that we're working hard at Red Hat to provide our customers. We give them, analytics dashboards so that they can see, when they do automation, what they're conceptually saving in terms of resources. But beyond that, we're all struggling with the Great Resignation, right? Something we hear from our customers, and you can, read about it anywhere, is that we're all struggling to find talented, technical and cybersecurity staff. And then we're struggling to pay them enough and then to retain them. So once you are lucky enough to hire one of these skilled individuals, how do you keep them? Well, probably the best way is not to give them boring rote work to do, right? We want them doing the brain intensive work that we hired them for. So there have actually been studies, I think it was in a CEO magazine or CIO magazine, about how automation strategies can actually lead to retaining more of your skilled IT staff as well.
It's incredible. Well, Nick, tie a bow on this conversation. I could go forever. We're pretty close to being out of time here, so put the cherry on top for us.
Thanks, George. And Sebastian is just bringing up so many more, amazing points here to feed off of. I think one I just want to highlight is that, we really have, we have demonstrated, I think, through just some of the automation efforts that we've done here, that as you automate and you take some of those manual steps out of the process, it's sometimes not all about, the cost ROI, even though that's really there. It's sometimes it's all about kind of unlocking the workforce, like Sebastian had mentioned. So, if you think about those folks, if you have 10 people kind of working on a product, and previously it was a manual pipeline to generate it, but now I get a bunch of time back, and you have 10 really experienced folks focusing on the new analytical effort to kind of answer the next cutting edge question. That's a pretty powerful formula when you really start to scale that out. And I think it's a challenging one for folks to sometimes, even I can say for myself, sometimes it's kind of hard to articulate exactly where all of the savings come through. But I can tell you from personal experience, it's really exciting to see when a team has migrated from a manual process into more of an automated space, just how they're able to start doing exactly what Sebastian mentioned. You're kind of thinking about the next level question. I can, now that I can see data and I have access to it, I have my metrics, my automated dashboard, whether it's, the analytic that I'm building, data acquisition, the cybersecurity component that Sebastian mentioned, the fact that I can see that information and it's automated, and now I have some breathing room to actually make some analytical decisions about, oh, wow, I didn't realize before when I just had this summarized at this level that there's some actually interesting trends here that I want to dig into. And do I have some tools in my tech stack that actually let me go dig into those things so I can generate the next level of analytics, and we can really start to figure out, like, oh, wow, there's this interesting trend happening here. Have we ever thought about maybe that's related, or what is it correlated with other data sets? And that's, I think, really the big critical component, and where we're headed here as a CDA organization is really talking about some of those integrated data analytic capabilities and opportunities that come down the road, tied with all of the new AI, ML focused predictive use cases that are certainly coming down the pipeline. But again, automation, it just creates the foundation to be able to support, in my opinion, any level of that pipeline, wherever you're at in it. We have to start automating somewhere. Typically, we focus on the data acquisition side, but once you start giving time back to the rest of the community, it's really exciting to see the next level of questions that they're able to ask, especially in the space where they're a subject matter expert. Hopefully that helps.
Nick Lanham, saving the best stuff for last. Thanks for being here today, sir.
Thank you, George. This was amazing. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. And Sebastian, I appreciate even the opportunity to be on the call with you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
I also want to thank Presidio Federal and Red Hat for making programs like this possible. I hope to see you at another event soon. For GovExec, I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.